This podcast is sponsored by the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. My name is Dr. Tom Weshefsky, and I will be your host for this ongoing podcast series. By continuing to interview the world's leading authorities in orthokeratology and myopia control, I hope to keep you up to date on the latest news, research, and information, and to give you the tools that you can use to better serve your patients and to help grow your practice. This is part 2 of my interview with Dr. Mike Lipson. Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'd like to shift gears now, and I'd like to talk to you about the FDA's position on myopia control. Not sure if you were there, but I'm sure you're aware of the recent FDA workshop on myopia control.
I was there.
You were there. Okay. Well, that is phenomenal because that's what I would really like to talk about. I've already gotten some of the backstory from Carrie Herzberg, who was also in attendance. Rather than me just relaying what Carrie related to me, I'd like to hear it from the horse's mouth. Tell us what went on.
Well, it was. I was very excited about the meeting, thinking this is a meeting where the FDA is going to lay out the groundwork for how we're going to have to design studies for myopia control in the future. What is it going to take for them to approve some device for myopia control? And I guess I was a little disappointed in the meeting, to be very perfectly honest, in that it seemed that there was a prearranged agenda that was targeting only soft lenses at that meeting. That was my take on it.
That's the take I got as well.
Every time there were experts up there in every aspect of myopia control, from research to wavefront to Ortho K. And when data was presented in Ortho K, they said, well, that's relating to Ortho K. We're here to talk about soft lenses today. It seemed that there was something arranged ahead of time that I didn't know about.
Yeah, it seems preordained.
Yes. And I was a little disappointed in that. But basically, they were arguing about really amazing details, but I guess that's what they need. You know, if they're looking at this as a new device or a drug, they have to look at a number of different aspects of this. One of the main things they were discussing at long length was, in soft lenses, how do you design a control group?
Right.
And what's the ideal control group? Is it a group of kids wearing soft lenses versus these experimental lenses that were multifocal lenses? And should they be exactly age matched, a number of hours of wear, everything else? And it seems pretty logical that you'd want to do that, but there were arguments on both sides that said you should do things slightly differently, and it's very disappointing from a clinician standpoint to listen to this. I think they have to go through all of this. I don't know, were there other specific issues you wanted me to address on that? Or is it...
Well, you know, my impression, and again, this is probably my own take on it, if you start talking about soft lenses, you have some very large players in the market with very deep pockets and very well funded. You've got Cooper,
Mm-hmm.
You've got Alcon, you've got Bausch & Lomb, you've got Vistakon, and I guess the FDA looks on it as like, well, we already are okay with soft lenses for kids as it is, so just changing the design slightly, it's already there. It shouldn't be that big of an issue. And I still think that they just take a jaundiced look or view of Ortho K, in spite of whatever successes and in spite of whatever research we may have. It just seems to be that I think we're going to be fighting an uphill battle, and that since we don't have any large corporate entities that can really push an Ortho K agenda,
Yep.
I don't know that Ortho K will ever get that kind of nod of approval from the FDA, regardless of how effective it is.
That was my impression, that the obstacles that they had put up for the studies, the qualifications to get something approved for myopia control had so many hurdles that it would be impossible to get that for Ortho K. And you mentioned track record or safety record. One of the issues that came up at that meeting was, well, I don't think we've established that soft lenses are safe for kids in this range that you're talking about, 7, 8, 9 years old. There are studies regarding safety in adults and young adults, but not in those kids, because typically we haven't fit kids with soft lenses at that age when they need the myopia control. And we've waited till they're a little bit older. So they said, well, we don't know that this lens is safe for a 7-year-old to wear to school all day long, or wear it for 7 years, or how many years they were going to do this study for. So where we kind of think of soft lenses as being very safe, and we actually had more studies about the safety of Ortho K lenses in that age range than we did for soft lenses. So I don't know. I'm glad I'm a clinician. That's all I can say. I like doing what I'm doing. It's, I guess, when this thing with Bausch and Lomb and Paragon merged together, after my initial shock to this happening, I guess I kind of tried to take a step back and say, well, is there anything good that could come out of it? And what you alluded to was one of those things, is now we might have an entity big enough to promote this to the general public, to promote this to the FDA and other sources, to really establish this as a safe procedure, just a legitimate procedure, and that it works.
Right. One of the other things that I was told was that, unfortunately, just because of the source, many of the studies that we have on myopia control as relates to Ortho K come from China. That's where they have the biggest problem, and they are doing a lot of work on. They've been working hard at myopia control for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And so they probably have some of the best data out there, but the impression I got was that because it was from China, that the FDA was not going to consider any of it.
Well, I think you're right, and they've also seen data from studies that have been done around the globe that tend to show that the Asian eye is different than the Caucasian eye, and that sometimes myopia progression is faster in Asians than in Europeans. There was one study by a guy from Australia, Donovan. I don't remember that study, but they showed that there was faster progression in Asians than in European. So on another count, I guess in that vein, one of the other established groups in this country working with kids is, I don't know if you're familiar with the JABE Center. They are a large center for kids. You've heard of PDIG? They run PDIG. It's a Pediatric Eye Disease Investigator Group. Many of the studies that they do are NIH funded, and they're done on amblyopia, exotropia, things like that. They're well funded. And 3 years ago, I made a proposal to them about a myopia control study using Ortho K lenses versus spectacles. And they have a system where they take about 20 proposals a year, and each of these proposals gets an investigator to present it for 5 minutes and say, okay, present it to the group. Everybody discusses the merits and the potential shortfalls of this, and there's a discussion in the afternoon, and 2 or 3 of those proposals are considered for further development. Well, when this was presented, it was kind of radical down there because the group is about 70, 75% ophthalmologists. And believe it or not, it made it to the top 3, this proposal. Wow. And they have these expert researchers, and they developed a protocol based on some of my suggestions, and then it got redone and got presented to the executive board by Ruth Manny. She's a member of this group.
Okay.
She's down in Houston. And she was the one who actually got to present this, and it did not get approved at that point. And the reasons that they cited for this was mainly they were concerned on safety But the practical reason, not enough of their participants were familiar with Ortho K. and so even if they got into the study, they wouldn't know what to do with it in their own office. So,
right.
As it turns out, they are in the final stages of developing a myopia control study as we speak, but it does not involve Ortho K. Guess what it involves? Atropine, drugs, what they like to do.
Yeah, of course.
So they're going to do a study in the U.S. on atropine, where there is a real shortfall of data in the U.S. on that, just as you alluded to before.
Right.
It's a fun field to be involved with on a daily basis. And anybody who is doing it obviously gets that feedback.
Of course, of course.
And we have to justify it, and it would be nice to have some supporting data to say, you know, here's what the science community says about it, not just what the clinical community says about it.
Very good. Well, I'm going to try going in a totally opposite direction and get away from myopia control for a bit.
Okay.
And, you know, one of the things that has happened, I practice in Myrtle Beach, since the economy tanked a few years ago, it's changed the demographic of my area rather substantially. We went from an area that was rapidly growing for several years and most of the people coming in were young families, and there were a lot of children coming in. But since the recession, a lot of that migration of people has slowed down dramatically. It's picked up again in the last 2 or 3 years, but now we're getting mostly retirees come in. And what I've found is occurring in my Ortho K practice is I'm not doing as much myopia control as I used to, but I'm fitting a lot more adults. Do you do many adults in your clinic?
Yes, I do. Not nearly as many. But I think this topic came up on the Google discussion group not too long ago as well. And, you know, some people, it seemed, writing in had the impression, like our patients, that Ortho K is just for kids. And I will say that the adults that I have done are probably more excited about it than the kids.
Absolutely. They're my happiest patients.
Because of a number of reasons you can think of, and it's logical to think that they've been wearing glasses a long time. To be free of glasses for them is a blessing, is something that they cannot even describe. They've kind of psychologically thought that, okay, I wear glasses, my eyes are going to get worse for my whole life, and they're never going to get better. And here's all of a sudden one day you come into the picture and say, I'm going to make your eyes better. And they love it. And it's adjustable, and so we can do monovision. It is reversible. So if for some reason it doesn't meet with their expectations in every single way, we can go back. But just like with the kids, once we kind of tease them a little bit with this, they don't want to give it up.
That's absolutely true. What I'm finding is I'm getting more husband and wife teams coming in to do this, and it's almost a competition between them as to who gets better vision quicker. It's really fascinating to watch it happen, and they're really, really highly motivated. You know, I guess it's all us boomers that don't want to get old, and especially where I am, you know, they moved to the South and lifestyles are probably a bit more active, and they're out playing golf a lot. They're outside a lot, going to the beach.
The water sports.
Yeah. It's really seeming to become my primary mode of Ortho K as adults these days. Not why I really got into it, but it's really seems that that's what's going on in my practice. And so we're doing just fine with that, and making a lot of people happy. So.
Well, we get that a lot, and like I said, I think sometimes you fall into that just because of problems that patients have had through the years. Most of the adult patients who come in, they don't like wearing glasses. They get into contact lenses, and again, although our contact lenses that we have now are very good, some people don't do well with them in terms of dryness related to allergies, the itching, the deposits on lenses. And they're frustrated. They say, what else can we do? I don't want to go back to glasses. And when we first started doing this on adults, we were kind of forced into this. Say, well, there is this other alternative. Well, we don't wait that long now to describe that.
Right.
I just present it, at the end of every exam on adults and say, we can do this in correction in glasses, in contacts that you wear during the day, or contacts that you only wear while you sleep. And some of them will look at me, what did you just say?
Yeah. Yeah, I never heard of that before.
Yeah, and that opens the door, obviously,
Sure.
for the good discussion, and it gets them very excited. So,
now, also with adults, are you a proponent of fitting post-LASIK patients with Ortho K?
I do it, and I think if they have been undercorrected in myopic LASIK and they have a small remaining amount of nearsightedness, they can be very successful with this. If this was a myopic LASIK that was overcorrected, that's more difficult.
Sure.
But it is a more difficult fit, and for anybody attempting this, I would go slowly, pick your patients very carefully, don't make too many promises, and just understand that it works just a little bit differently. But with the experience, it works quite well.
Now, do you have any concerns for the possibility of flap dislocation or any issues? And sometimes you'll have a patient who will get a little rough removing a lens in the morning. Is there a concern for that with you?
I think you have to be at least aware that those things are possible, but knock on wood, that's not happened to me yet. These are any of my patients.
Now, would you put a time limit? So I've had other docs say, well, if I have a patient who had their LASIK done 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I'm a lot more willing to attempt an Ortho K fit to smooth out their cornea or to correct the residual myopia, as opposed to somebody who's only maybe a couple of years post-op.
Well, I would say the minimum I have done, as far as I know, is about a year.
Okay.
Where a patient came in and they said they were undercorrected, very disappointed, and said they wanted to go back to have an enhancement. The doctor wouldn't do it. Either they said there was insufficient thickness or whatever the reason, they said they weren't willing to do that. If the doctors who did the LASIK is willing to go in and do an enhancement, I look at the contact lens as being a fairly tame alternative.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you the same question I like to ask people who are on the podcast, sort of the last question. If you could look 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, what do you see coming down the pike that might be different than what we're doing now, or that perhaps is something that may be really not on the radar screens just yet?
Okay. That's an interesting question. What I would see happening or what I would like to see happening, I guess, might be a little different.
Of course.
I think that there's a huge potential for more customized Ortho K design lenses. And again, you mentioned something like this before, trying to design a specific lens for myopia control. Mostly what we have been doing right now is correcting myopia and getting them to see well in the distance, and that the effect of myopia control has been a welcome side effect.
Right.
But if we can learn a little more about the location and the amount of ideal myopic defocus, we could technically design a lens for each individual patient for ideal myopia control. And that would be my goal for the field.
There have been some interesting presentations done at Vision by Design last year, and I know that they're planning on an update on it for this year by Carrie Herzberg and Marino Fermente about specific design changes in treatment zone and reverse curve,
aspheric,
etc. showing some very interesting results in perhaps how to find the most efficacious myopia control design. And whether or not they've got the right answer, I don't really know yet. I think only time will tell. But it's kind of interesting to see, where do you locate that zone? How wide must that zone be? How deep must that zone be? Is it just a matter of volume of tissue that you're moving? And if you're moving the same amount of volume over a wider area versus a narrower area, am I making sense to you?
Yes. I guess what I would look at rather as a clinician right now, I am looking at not so much how wide you're making this or all those different nuances that you're describing, but I think we have to look at something that we haven't done conventionally right now, which is more acceptance and more clinical applications for peripheral refraction. And we've been relying on the scientists to do all this. We have to bring it to a clinical level, I think, and say we have to design a specific peripheral refraction to get the ideal results. And whatever it takes to do that, that may be in those design things that you're describing.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I remember, probably 5 or 6 years ago, them talking about designing an autorefractor that could do peripheral refractions, because peripheral refractions were very difficult to do. And my understanding was they were using some sort of free space autorefractor.
It's done now. It's a design that we have in the office. We played with a little bit. It's a open field, they call it.
Right.
Where you're not looking into a machine, but off into space, and they project these lenses in front of the eye. Anyways, it's by a Japanese company now.
Okay.
One's called Grand Sakwa. The other one is called Shin Nippon.
Okay. A couple of years ago, Gary Gerber was touting a system similar to that was being developed by a small American company at Georgia Tech. I thought it was pretty fascinating, and they were real close to bringing something to market, or so they said.
As it is right now, these machines that you're describing, doing a peripheral refraction is a cumbersome and a time-consuming task. But there was one machine developed in Australia that we may never see the light of day in the United States, because it will never get approved, but it actually set up 13 spots in a arc-like pattern and took 13 refractions at the same time.
Wow.
So rather than doing each one of these different degrees, like 5-degree increments, out to 30 or 40 degrees. And there's a study published on that in OVS. It's a fascinating piece of equipment that would be able to do this in a time-appropriate way for clinical use.
All right. Well, we have lots of hopes for the future, and in the meantime, we'll still keep plugging away with Ortho K and hope for the best with the FDA.
Yep. Just like me, that it's a fun thing to do, Ortho K. We keep doing it. And from one doctor at a time to one patient at a time, it's becoming more popular. It's been approved by the FDA for 16 years now. And I don't know, maybe it's just starting to gain a little momentum and to become more popular for us, so for everybody.
Well, that's our hope. Mike, thank you very much for appearing on the podcast. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I look forward to seeing you out in Dallas at Vision by Design.
In April. We'll be there.
In April.
Yep.
Very good. Thanks for your time, Mike.
Thank you.
To join the discussion about this episode, log into the Ortho K podcast forum located on the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control's web portal. This is Dr. Tom Weshefsky. Until next time, thank you very much for listening.